My name is David Hayne Menendez, and I am the Executive Director of Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. Welcome to our monthly statewide meeting and program. Usually we start off, obviously, by doing the renaming, introducing myself, and then having you drop things into the chat. I would also always like to open the floor for questions, ideas, thoughts about what we can do better or do in the future, but also to give a few brief announcements. So since Greg is on the call, I'll specifically say that we have ongoing creation care efforts, obviously, for PAIPL. And if you don't know what creation care is, it's the most direct way in which we combat climate change through the planting, as in this year, of thousands upon thousands, probably by the end of the year, close to 10,000 trees across the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and also in places like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh through partnerships with local communities and congregations. We also then do the removal of invasive species and other tending to creation as part of our commitments to be stewards of creation. Beyond that, since Bill, also a board member, is on the call, we have a monthly advocacy call that our policy manager leads every fourth Thursday. So this month it'll be on the 26th. We moved it back from noon to, Bill, I think 5 o'clock, correct? Yes. And those policy calls don't require that you're a policy expert or a policy wonk, but rather are interested in knowing what's going on in the world for environmental justice and legislation, and really who to talk to as well. We have begun also having a monthly letter writing training, whereby Phyllis Bloomberg from the Jewish Earth Alliance partners with
George.
Sorry, partners with
George. Period.
Sorry, there you go. Partners with Amani Reed, our policy manager again, and will walk people through ways to write to your legislators about a specific issue. So instead of just throwing all of the issues of the day at you, we basically say, this is the one that we're going to write about this month. These are the people that you can write to. We can figure out who your local elected officials are and legislators are, and then really send basically packages of letters to them to know that there are people of faith and conscience, congregations and otherwise out there to voice those perspectives and hopefully move the needle a little bit towards policies and legislation that we would want to support. Beyond that, we do have our chapter meetings. I see some members of some of our local chapters, like Courtney on the main line outside of Philadelphia. We are also launching a Pittsburgh chapter, which Wanda Guthrie, one of our speakers from tonight, is helping to help us launch out in Pittsburgh. So we will have eventually regular programming and meetings for Pittsburgh once again. We have our annual conference, which will take place in November. So please keep an eye out for that. And we are always looking for people to help us with letter writing, with lobby visits, with projects on the ground that would directly help your community and your congregations, as well as outreach to communities and congregations across the state. So that, I think, is a pretty good overview of the things that we have coming in the immediate future and over the next few months. With that, I will say, if there's anybody that has questions or comments or any ideas of what they would like PAIPL to pursue, or even just questions about PAIPL, if you are new to us, please feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat. Caroline, do you have a question or a comment? No. So for the most part, these meetings, other than this little introductory period, is open for conversation, but we also ask that people obviously respect the speakers and what they're going to be presenting to us tonight. So thus, if you can mute yourself until you either get called upon, or you can feel free to drop messages in the chat as we go. There will usually be a sufficient period for questions and answers towards the end, where we can really engage our speakers and find out all the extra information that we want to know. Okay. is also a way for me to buy time as people trickle into the room more so. So, by way of introduction, I would like to tell you about our Pennsylvania Interfaith Board member from Pittsburgh, Wanda Guthrie, who is a former board member of the Thomas Merton Center in Pittsburgh and is still a member of the center. She was the 2015 Green Faith Fellow. She is a trainer and national board member for creating a culture of peace. And we are always happy to have her on board with the programming that we do at Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. And as I said, she will shortly be one of the people who will help us relaunch our Pittsburgh chapter. With Wanda, we will also have, speaking tonight, Karen Bernard, who has led classes, workshops, and cosmic walks in Pittsburgh, all based on the story of the universe. And she studied with Brian Swim in California, where she received her master's degree in culture and spirituality. She has been involved with the East End Food Co-op for many years, currently as the book buyer, and she enjoys teaching classes on food and mindfulness. She's also the co-founder of Pittsburgh Community Death Care. Karen has helped to facilitate death cafes, and she sometimes works as a celebrant for weddings and funerals. So without further ado, thank you both for coming tonight and for speaking with us. And I will mute myself and let things go. Welcome.
Thank you. I would like to introduce Karen too, because she is one of my mentors. The Thomas Berry story, the news story, was introduced to me by Karen. And she also was one of the people who helped with the Thomas Merton Center Working Group, Eco-Justice Working Group. And I met her in 2012, just about the time, well, I knew her before, but she really, we really got to know each other in 2012 when she helped launch the Eco-Justice Working Group. To do this at the Thomas Merton Center, we knew we had to be spiritual, and we knew we had to be part of an ongoing dialogue with peace and social justice and economic justice, and then now eco-justice. And so we fashioned our mission statement around the work of Joanna Macy and Thomas Berry and Brian Swim. And it's been wonderful. That was 2012. And in 2015, when Laudato Si was introduced, it was introduced in June, I believe, but in April, the Academy of Sciences and Social Sciences of the Vatican did a wonderful statement that led to this on climate change and where we all are in the world. And so we were very excited to see the paper, and then Laudato Si came out, and it was, just wonderful for us. And so we gathered people in Pittsburgh and did a interfaith gathering and had a panel of people from a variety of faith traditions talking about what this meant to them. And for those of us who had been working with Thomas Berry and Brian Swim, it was so recognizable that of course it did, because we're all in this whole giant cosmos together and with everything around us. So of course, this means a lot to say, this is really a spiritual journey. And so it was a time when we did a lot to introduce this work. So I'm so happy because Karen agreed to do this, and she loves to talk about this, and I'm just going to let you go ahead, Karen, for a while.
Well, thank you, Wanda, and thank you, David, and everyone. Yeah, back then we even started a nonprofit called Dream of the Earth. There were lots of people in the classes, and people were excited about the new story, the new cosmology. And the mission statement of Dream of the Earth, it does still exist as a nonprofit, but the mission statement was Thomas Berry's, this is Wanda's sign off on her email as well. Thomas Berry's words, he says, it's a mouthful, and I'll slow down afterwards, but the historical mission, well, I'll just say the historical mission of our times is to reinvent the human. I'll just stop there for now. To reinvent the human at this, as a species, at the species level, and we got to say that as a species, we're not doing such great work on this planet. We're not doing so well, and so his idea was that we need to reinvent the human as a whole species. And part of the way we do that is, or a major way we do that, is through story. He also says, as part of the community of life systems, as part of the whole community of life that we live within, and also in a time developmental context. Now, the new cosmology, as it's called, kind of flips sort of the way that I think most of us have been it flips the message that we get in our culture, that really humans are kind of the center of the universe, and we're the epitome of evolution. And, you know, everything kind of revolves around us. And this really flips things so that it puts us, the beauty is that it puts us in the larger context of the universe and in relationship. We're humans in relationship to the rest of the community of life. And being part of a story at that scale, being part of stories are what give us our identity, whether we're talking about stories on an individual, like stories of who we are in our family, who we are in our culture. Stories give us our identity, and they give us the direction for how to live, and stories at the personal level, but also cosmology. A cosmology is a story of how do things come to be the way they are, and what does this mean for who we are and what we do and how we act. And so the new cosmology it directs us in a way that is grounded in the reality of what we know about the universe. It directs us and it energizes us. And, you know, it comes out of science, but it doesn't leave out the spirit. And Wanda and I were talking about this earlier, how, you know, with the Enlightenment in the last, 400 or 500 years ago, when the church, let's say the Catholic Church in Europe, could no longer hold what the scientists were discovering. You know, Copernicus said, you know, the sun goes around the earth, and the, you know, church didn't want to hear it. They were kind of like, well, you guys take the physical world and we'll take the spiritual world, and the two were split, and neither one of them will never be whole. We as people, as a planet, will never be whole until we bring those back together, because neither one has the whole story. We have to begin to see that it's been spiritual all along. We can't, the spirit didn't just come in along the way from somewhere else. If we're going to tell the story of us and everything, it all starts at the beginning. It starts at the beginning where everything flared forth out of mystery, and also everything and everyone is included in this story. This is if we want inclusivity, this is the story for all of us, because there's no one and nothing that's left out. And I'll pause there.
Yeah. Yeah, story is so important. Yes, and it's interesting because we work on the cosmic walk so that we can walk the story and reflect. And we really we really reflect the universe. This is what we do as people. So reflecting the whole cosmology and how we came to be is just really important. Yes.
Yeah, the cosmic walk, the beauty of it is physically putting ourselves into the story. There's just something special about walking. When you're walking from the beginning of the universe and you're walking in a spiral, and it's quite a while before the beginnings of galaxies, a long while, and it's quite a while till you get to the beginnings of life on Earth. And just to physically walk that and put ourselves into that context is kind of special. And, you know, anything, Thomas Berry said, and he says it in the movie, the film that you watched or will watch, tell the story, tell the story, tell the story, so that we can deepen our understanding of how we're just related to everything. And I think the more we tell the story, the more I found that, well, I know when I first learned all this, I was kind of exploding with excitement. And I started to see the world with deep time eyes. And I saw how everything has a story, and you can't treat things the same way. You can't live in the world the same way when you realize how all these stories are interconnected, how the worms are everything practically is our ancestors. I mean, worms develop the nervous system, and you know, you see trees differently and green differently. They were the first beings to learn to eat sunlight. It just, the other thing, just the way I'm talking is different than the way I used to think. I didn't think of chlorophyll molecules as having agency. The way we learn about it as something, it's photosynthesis. It's this mechanism. It's the, you know, it's something that's not alive. It just happens kind of automatically. But the way I learned to look at this with through my teachers, Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, Sister Miriam McGillis at Genesis Farm, the world, Thomas says, is not a collection of objects. It's a communion of subjects. And that's one of the most important things, the most important of the three characteristics of the universe that these guys talk about is subjectivity, that everything has an interiority, has a depth, is self-emergent. It's alive and evolving. It's all evolving all the time. And the idea that, you know, well, it was before trees, but that these beings tried lots of different ways, I'm sure, and they to learn to catch photons that are going at the speed of light without hands. They learned to do this. So just learning any one thing like that just gives such a different perspective that it's awe-inspiring. And, you know, that's probably one of the major elements of any spiritual tradition also would be awe. And, you know, I think I remember Brian saying, one time that, when you think about what is the purpose of the human being, maybe one major purpose is just to be awe-inspired. And maybe we're here to celebrate the amazingness of the universe. We are the species that has learned through science, through empirical observation, we have learned this story of the universe by studying the earth, by looking carefully. Thomas Berry says, the earth is revelatory. Maybe besides looking in texts like sacred texts, he calls himself a geologian because he looks to the universe for revelation. And so we are the species that has learned the story. We are the species that has gone out and seen ourselves as a planet. We are the ones that could be celebrating this. And I know that Brian pointed out that, what we do in this culture that we live in is that those scientific facts go into a journal or go into a textbook, and they stay there. They stay there for the scientists to think about. We have things so cut off and boxed up and in their place in our world, instead of us being in this world and celebrating the vast, incredible, awesome story we are part of, this journey. Pause.
Yeah, I think the whole thing about being reflective, that we are also able to change our culture. That's what we do all the time. And so the importance of the story is that we can change our culture, and that we really need to do so pretty quickly. But this is the message that is, for me, so unifying, that all over the world, people have different cultures. And the unifying story is so amazing on, how we got here, how the universe brought forth everything, and being able to tell each other stories,
Mm-hmm.
and reflect on them and exchange them creates a culture. Many times we talk about things one needs to sacrifice, but it's really the things that are so joyful about being able to change our culture and recreate ourselves at the species level. And to know that when doing that, we can change the cosmology, because we're part of it. It is our story. So that was the main thing that really brought me so far in this direction.
So Wanda and Karen, just to step back and maybe provide a bit of a framing for it, we have some questions in the chat about, like one, Tom, for example, was asking what exactly happens on a cosmic walk, what is the mission of Dream of the Earth, and what does the group do? And then Tim, to add to that, was asking about how does the message impact climate change specifically, if you could help contextualize kind of the overall story that we're talking about, and cosmology to, not everybody's coming to the Zoom session with the same background or connection to different things. So
that was what happens on a cosmic walk. How does this relate to climate change? And what was the middle thing?
Sorry, hold on 1 second. What is the mission of Dream of the Earth, and what does the group do? And then Greg just asked, where other than in a cosmic walk can we experience or hear the cosmology story?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, that was 4 things. with the mission of Dream of the Earth was the mission that I was talking about that Thomas Berry said, our mission is to reinvent the human at the species level through shared dream experience in the community, life community. Right now, we have not been doing much. It's this message is not something you can just talk about on, every day on the street, or, it's a little tough. I really do think, Wanda and I were talking about this, that it needs to be in this neck of the woods. I mean, we're not in California, we're not where, people are open to a lot of different spiritual ideas. I think it needs to happen through spiritual communities. Let's see, where can you learn the story? We do have a list of resources that we're going to share that we got together, where you can learn about the story, or learn. Actually, there's a book that Thomas Berry and Brian Swim wrote together called The Universe Story. And then there's a book that Brian Swim, I'm just going to highlight these two specifically for the story. We actually didn't put that on the list, but it's called The Universe Story, or The Story of the Universe. Anyway, there's another book called Journey of the Universe, and there's a film as well that Brian Swim narrates. So that's two great places to learn the story. But it's really, the story, it's just a matter of there's something called big history as well that's started to integrate into universities and even high schools, even grade schools. It's missing the spiritual component. But the idea is to start telling, to contextualize, to start telling the story, putting ourselves into a larger context. Again, it's missing, it's not focusing at all on the spiritual, but it is broadening the story. But one of the reason I thought of that is because students might take on a project and they do the big history of whatever they're interested in. One time a teacher was talking about how she had a student that wasn't really interested in anything, but he loved corn chips. So she suggested he do the big history of corn chips, which is, like, you start learning about corn, learning about grasses, and how grasses, we wouldn't have large animals if we didn't have large grasslands, and grass grows all over the world, and how that is just like allowed agriculture and culture to, I mean, you could go anywhere with that, and you can start anywhere really with the story and start learning however you want. You could learn, pick an animal and pick an ecosystem, or, the story is all around us. You can learn through rocks. You can learn, you can learn it really anyway. But I gotta say, Brian Swim is a mathematical cosmologist. He studied physics, got his PhD in physics, and but he's extremely poetic. And I'll just give you one example of his kind of thinking. He tells a story where he was waiting to go fishing with his father one time, and he was sitting near the lake, and he was dropping a stone into the water, just dropping it and thinking, it dawned on him, this guy who had just finished his PhD in physics, it dawned on him that he really had finished his PhD in gravity, the physics of gravity. He really had no idea what gravity was. And he has all the formulas for it, but what is this force of attraction, of allurement, of bodies that come together, that hold each other in the universe? One of his thoughts is that maybe gravity is an early form of love. And I remember he has this saying, life itself is the ecstasy of the bond between the sun and the earth. I'm gonna say that again. Life itself is the ecstasy of the bond between the sun and the earth. And it's just such a different way of looking at things when you start looking cosmologically. And he takes those powers that form the universe. I'm kind of jumping here, and I will get back to the questions. He takes those powers that form the universe, like allurement, like homeostasis, like cataclysm, like there's 10 of them that he names, and he shows how those powers of the universe, this is in one of the resources called Powers of the Universe, how the same forces that form the universe formed us as well and work through us. It's just so much of integrating, so much of the way he tells the story integrates us into this universe, rather than us being like an addendum that was plopped on the earth that was already made, and we're just kind of here to rule the earth or to dominate. So when you take this switch of things and you're changing that whole story about how we're here to dominate, when you take the story and you start what Thomas Berry calls the great work, and one of his books is called The Great Work, and you look at the major institutions in our world, and you see how they're most basically, I'm saying this, can't remember exactly how he says this, but we live in an exploitive economy, and our institutions are basically structured around the economy. You can certainly see that with education. You go to school to be trained to get a job in this economy, jobs. That's what the aim is. And then when compulsory schooling started, the Elwood P. Coverly at Stanford was dean of education, was basically saying that the people that started the compulsory education were the Carnegies and his crew, his ilk. It was to train people to the reading, writing, and arithmetic. That was all clerical. It was, you line people up in row. It was all structured for the corporation. And look at our food system. Most of the food we get, I mean, yes, in the last few years, we have, learned by way of Alice Walker, who kicked us off with gardens and local food. We've come a ways with that, but majorly our food system is built. It's industrial. It's pretty much completely industrial. And to talk about climate change, if you put yourself in this story and start living in a more mutually enhancing way, because you have to, if you start to see, when you see the world differently, you can't live the same way. And if we change just the way we ate, in fact, industrial farming is a major contributor to climate change. If anyone wanted to do anything, anybody in their life, changing the way you eat 3 times a day or however many, that would be a major shift in the climate. And as for a cosmic walk, Wanda, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, Karen is a great cosmic walk person, but I will just say that we're learning a lot at the Pittsburgh chapter of Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, because we made, with Karen's help, we made our rope for our spiral for our walk here, and it's 137 feet of rope, And you start from the beginning with the Great Flare, 13.7 billion years ago, and walk in this spiral along the rope to the present day. It's a timeline, and it's really wonderfully experiential. There's a flaring forth light in the center, and you light your candle from that light and walk the walk. And in each place, you see another candle and go through this until the end, where you can say, I'm Wanda and I'm the universe. It's really very experiential, done in a darkened room. There's music, there's hopefully dancing afterward, dancing before, and food. But it's a really great experiential thing. And we really want to promote this throughout Pennsylvania as one way to experience where we are in the universe, and who we are and what time it is. And it is
Time it is.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and
It's time to wake up.
yeah, it's time
Yeah.
to wake up. You know, that we talking about climate change. Here we are. We're going to make this change. We all have a following. We all have people we can do this with. We can gather in communities of care for the earth. And you know, it's something I hope to see happening. We in Pittsburgh, we've done it a few times with Karen's help and expertise. And we have a couple of people who've done some really great music along with it. But we're really grateful. We've done it at solstice times, New Year's time, you know, it just, you know, various times. But we're excited to do it again in our chapter. And I think the other thing is, when you take a look at the material, what you're doing, I think it's a great way to introduce other people in your congregations, in your neighborhoods, you know, to just this idea that we're expanding with the universe. And in that expansion, we want to create a different way of being in the world. You know, and we will. So yeah, and I'm here to help anybody, and I know Karen's here to help anybody who would like to know more about this or participate in your congregation or neighborhood.
You know, you're reminding me just somehow that Thomas Berry said that we will go forward as one earth community, or we will not go forward at all. And I think, I don't know, it's so clear to me how true that is. If we don't change our perspective and see ourselves as a part of this, we're a part of it, whether we're conscious of that or not. I mean, we as a species, well, you know that this has now been named, I think officially, the Anthropocene. We've ended the Cenozoic era that's been happening since the dinosaurs went extinct and mammals started to flourish. But that era is over, and that era is over because humans have such power, mainly through our technology, but our consciousness hasn't gone with it. So we are participating, more than participating, in this journey, but we're not really conscious of ourselves in relation to the whole. And again, we'll go forward as one whole earth community, or we won't go forward at all. And I think the story, it doesn't matter whether you are, what your role is, whether you're a spiritual leader, whether you're an artist, whether you're a mother, whether you're an engineer, whatever your job is, if you put yourself into this story and live according to this story, taking your place within the story, your life will change, and you can't, when you change, everything else, if from there evolves differently. You know, when you get to the end of the cosmic spiral, the cosmic walk, you start in the middle and you get to the end, and it really puts it in perspective, you know, how everything kind of has really just happened in the blink of an eye, everything that we know. It doesn't end there. It keeps going, and we can evolve differently if we everything will evolve differently if we change the story that we're living by.
So there are a few other questions, a good amount of comments as well, but a few questions as well in the chat. Tim asked, we humans are on a global path to climate chaos. How do we organize the power of story to inspire people across the world to take the necessary steps to curtail climate change? And to give you a bit of context on Tim, he is a significant proponent of education, especially as an important component of combating climate change, especially prioritizing our children and grandchildren and future generations. And he has quite a lot of passion for this and tries his best to go out into the world and live that mission as well. So I think that question comes from his own, his personal passion to figure out a way to mobilize and excite people through the power of story. So I think the question is, how do you see us organizing people through the power of story?
I want to say something about that, because I think the UN Development Goals, in fact, I think it's September 23rd, there's going to be prayer for how we take a look at the UN Development Goals and climate change. I think we haven't paid much attention in ways that we could. We did for a long time worry about World Bank and development goals, but then all of a sudden it was just off the radar. So I would say also that paying attention to how those countries and places and people need to have help with mitigating the worst problems of climate change. And this is a universal love and care. And it's a little difficult when you think of how COVID and the inequality of just vaccine is all across the world. But this is something that I would really wish that we could pay more attention to. The other thing with education and children, you know, for a long time, I've thought about how we have Vacation Bible School, but we don't have Vacation Earth School. You know, we have just little things, one place or another, where in our communities in the summer where children are educated in nature and where they are and planting and so on. But to have real curriculum for children in congregations that where they can hear the story, take a look at the story they've heard, put it together. You know, that I'm a Quaker, and there is a Quaker curriculum that I always recommend. It's really first day school curriculum. But if anybody knows of curriculums for children, I think Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light is a great place to let everyone know that you've got one and that this can work, and to just strengthen each other to be able to do it if they aren't going to get it in the regular school system. So that's what I think about kids and education and the great story.
There's also some very practical questions here about like, do you do the cosmic walk indoors or outdoors? I think you said outdoors because of the size of it.
It,
Can I
think-
say one more,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
thing about education?
Sure.
It depends on like what age and what the group is. There are, I think once you start getting into the story, maybe with some of the resources that are there that we listed, that's one thing. One thing can lead to another, but there is so much happening that we can't say all of what's happening. And honestly, if anybody who actually wants to start doing education, if you want to get in touch with me, I can help you like figure out what would be best for your situation. But there was I think it still exists, a charter school, an elementary school near Genesis Farm where Sister Miriam McGillis lives and teaches in New Jersey, called Ridge and Valley Charter School, I think. And the entire school was based around the story of the universe. So people have done these kinds of things and are doing these kinds of things. And there's just like multiple ways you can do it. We had at one of the Pioneers we had in Pittsburgh, the Pioneers forum we had in Pittsburgh, we did a poetic telling, a participatory telling of the story of the universe. And there was an artist that had made a batik of the evolution of the universe. And there's just like endless creative ways to tell the story and educate people. So, and yes, the cosmic walk can be done indoors or out. You just need a very big space, like a gym. We did it in the gym at the Episcopal Church. We did it in the giant room at the Friends meeting. We did it in a downstairs basement at the Unitarian Universalist. Yeah, you just need a pretty big space.
Following up on that, then they also said, have you filmed what you are doing with the cosmic walk, and can it be replicated with relative ease?
You know what else I was going to say? I don't know if you actually, I haven't looked recently, Wanda, but you were looking for examples of the cosmic walk. There is a website also that we didn't put on that list of resources. A couple of different websites that this couple has, Michael Dowd and Connie Barlow. The Great Story, I think, is their one of their main websites, and they have a lot of activities on there. They may even have some information about a cosmic walk, but they have a lot of different educational activities. Don't want to forget to say that, the Great Story. And he was a minister, like a fundamentalist type minister, and she was a scientist, and they got together. It's like the Darwin fish and the Jesus fish kissing on their van, their logo, kind of. And they travel around and kind of tell the story. But the basic elements of the cosmic walk you can find online, and like the events, you make little cards for each major event in the universe, and those you can find, and you can tweak and change them as you want. But yeah. Well,
I think there's also Larry Edwards has one as well from Miriam McGillis. Yeah, so look up the cosmic walk. Larry Edwards is very interesting. He's a
chemist, I think.
Chemist, geologist. Yeah, it's his. I didn't even know there was such a thing until I met him. But yeah.
Well, I learned from Sister Miriam. Wanda and I both experienced, and Joe experienced her cosmic walk at Genesis Farm. And I think that's where I got my info, but it's definitely available.
Yeah.
So Greg, his question kind of follows on that, which is there a script? And I think that was kind of answered with the website that you're talking about. Like there are elements of this that you can find online. I from my understanding of it, though, it's probably best to participate in something, and then kind of out of that, with the resources available, one can take and make their own and regenerate this at later times with different people in different locations. To that end, the other question that Lynn was suggesting, that I'd love to see this, and bet we all do. If you are in the Pittsburgh area, you can come and see it and do it with Wanda and the Pittsburgh PA IPL people. I do like Bill's comment here that I wanted to lift up, which was the movie was his first exposure to Thomas Berry, and he thinks his main takeaway was the need for humans to stop behaving as the dominant exploitative species. And I think something that you said, Karen, earlier that I liked was kind of the decentering of the human experience and the human being from all of creation. You know, it's not like this was made just for us, all around us, and that's a very nice story, but it also then doesn't place us within a context of all of creation. It makes the story about us, and creation becomes kind of an addendum. So in my mind, the overall mission then is to not only reflect, but to really fundamentally take a different spiritual and scientific approach to all of creation and all of the interactivity that exists there, and then move forward with that new perspective so that it informs everything we do, from
Yes.
eating to interacting with each other as fellow humans, to the way in which we interact with the air and the sun and everything else. Because the hope is that through the Cosmic Walk and everything else, the film, that one's reorientation allows them to better internalize that perspective, rather than just know that that's a thing. You know, if I speak this to you, it doesn't do the same thing as the experiential of like really seeing that happen.
You know what, I think often, like, why is evolution so threatening to some people? Because it makes us not so special and so different anymore. We don't want to think of ourselves as animals. We don't want to think of don't want to think of ourselves as part of this, but we don't really generally take this story and live it. So this is a matter of living the story that we know it is true. So yeah.
And there's some other really great comments here. Bill said it's about beyond reflection and awareness, are there next steps we should be taking? I mean, I think, Bill, you and I were having that conversation earlier of like the way in which we reduce, the way in which we reuse, the way in which we recycle, the way in which we literally navigate this world. Hopefully, after the experience of the Cosmic Walk and everything else, that it kind of makes it easier to do that reorientation.
You know, it just like one little example, but like on top of yours, like I started to just, I don't like I have a nightlight when I brush my teeth or take a shower or something like that. You know, like I know where my body parts are, I know how to brush my teeth. And I don't have bright lights on all the time. Like that's just one example, because I appreciate the night. I appreciate the darkness more. I just feel like I live in the world more in a whole different way. Like I don't maybe have the radio on all the time because I want to be in the day that I'm in. I wish I was a poet, but I can't tell you how much of a difference it's made in the way I live in my life, being in this story.
And Gail made a good point of that our institutions, our government have all been kind of established without the inclusion of our habitats, our environment, our fellow species. Mark then said there is a webinar on storytelling to build power and connection tomorrow night with the Sierra Club. And he dropped a link there for everybody. I will hopefully try to get that out to people, maybe through Facebook. I don't know if any of you follow us on Facebook, but we do try to post fairly regularly on there. George Dempsey wrote, Vacation Earth School. What a great idea. Yeah, actually, my children attend Valley Nature School, which has a kind of a blend between the Montessori and the Finnish model. So they spend now under COVID, 99%, but normally 90% of their time outdoors, in nature, interacting with it, exploring it, understanding it, learning from it, and really connecting to it on a daily basis. And I would say that it's made my son more resilient, more explorative. You know, when we go out into the woods, he's running up a mountain well before we do. You know, he has no concern or fear for that world, but rather understands himself as part of the natural environment in that way. He's also looking over my shoulder, which is one of the reasons why I don't have my camera on. Lynn said about many years ago, they had an Earth Care camp at State College Friends meeting. That sounds interesting. I do like the idea of Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light gathering resources and potentially like refashioning them in a way that maybe is both capable of being adapted for a faith tradition while simultaneously reapplicable to various faith traditions. Maybe that's a future grant-driven project that we might be able to take on.
Mhm.
You know, can I say one
Yeah, go
thing
ahead.
you're reminding me of? At Genesis Farm, Sister Miriam had a library, and everything was organized instead, not the Dewey Decimal System, but there were these 9 categories that I think Thomas Berry named,
Yes.
that if you look at the earth and the way earth in general works, earth is self-fulfilling, it's self-nourishing, self-educating, self-governing, self-healing, and I can't remember the other 3 categories. And like, if we think of it that way, these are all the things that we as humans do, that all species do. The living things have to nourish themselves, and they learn, and they govern. And as a, you know, just thinking of things that way and learning from the earth and how the earth does it, you know, instead of just put aside our hubris and start learning from not just about nature, but learning how nature does all these other things that we as humans need to do. Anything else on that, Wanda, or what do you?
No, yeah. I was thinking, I was thinking before we ended, I would like to give a little plug for the whole care of the, so I'm going to say it in a minute, for CELDEF, Community Environment Legal Defense Fund, who does the rights of nature and helps communities be able to defend their earth. It's a different kind of a legal process, but mostly with one of those is self-governing, and self-governing means also just taking everything in. And Grant Township in Pennsylvania, they only have 700 people, but they were able to stop an injection well in their town by voting to make this part of their city charter, that that would not despoil any of the natural environment. And we've always assumed that you get sued. In fact, you do get sued, but in this case, they didn't. The whole town voted that they were going to do this because they were going to save the hellbender salamander. And so they called themselves the hellbenders. Anyway, public, I'm going to get, how come I lose words? I hate getting old. Anyways, they made a movie, and it's called Invisible Hand, and I put it in the chat. It's in the chat, but it's a little send up for the story, and how they also looked at the way that the indigenous people in this area and how they cared for this land. And it's really a very, very good one. It's about self-governing, and also about how you can speak for the earth and take natural resources and speak for natural resources as well. So
and yeah, like Thomas would see the natural resources as beings in and of themselves,
yes.
participants in our community. And so the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund is about the rights of nature. And I remember we went to a workshop at Friends Meeting House many years ago, and they explained how, you know, all of our laws, they come from English common law, but all of our laws are based on property rights, essentially, not the rights of nature, or really, even at this point, the rights of human beings. That, you know, corporations have rights that we don't have. We know that, but that the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and then we put another. Wanda remembered this book called Wild Law, which is also written from the perspective of nature having rights, which what Ecuador and some other places have recognized the rights of nature.
I think Bolivia is another one. Two quick things. One is here in Lewisburg, where I'm a council member, one of my fellow members of council once said, we don't have a parking problem in Lewisburg, we have a walking problem in Lewisburg. And the reason that I bring that up is we don't have a pollution problem, we have a way humans live problem.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? Things burn, things overflow, things flood, all of those things happen. It's not the effect, and it's not even the pollutants that are the problem. And Bill just dropped in the chat that the world will be fine if we're all dead. You know, it doesn't stop because we're gone. The issue is not it is us, and the way in which we interact with it and everything around us.
But it's how we see ourselves and who we think we are in this scheme of things that really needs to change, you know?
And then Pam had a good question, which is, if you were going to read one of Thomas Berry's books to understand his perspective, which one would you recommend? And I will make the caveat that I did drop quite a lot of stuff in the chat earlier, which I will send out to the registrants of this video, of this session. So you will, at a later time, get not only the link to this recording, but also the resource list that Wanda and Karen graciously put together. But if you had one recommendation, Karen and Wanda, which one would you recommend, lift up?
What's your pick, Wanda?
Well, I don't know, Dream of the Earth or The Great Work would be mine. But Brian Swim has, go ahead with Brian.
Oh.
What do you think?
Well, of the two Thomas Berry, actually, honestly, I think I'd read Dream of the Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, just that's my answer. We are a dream of the earth. You know, I am the earth in Karen form. It's just a beautiful way of explaining how to see differently.
Yeah.
My son not long ago asked me, how can God be in the earth? And I explained to him, God is everywhere. And he's like, how can God be everywhere? And I said, because we are not separate from these things. And I go way too deep on talking about like molecular physics and the universality of atomic particles and things like that when he's 5 years old, and I should not be talking about these things. But nonetheless, I think that it is important to remind people in that way that, like, literally in a very obvious but not so experiential way, there is no difference between the materials around us and us. It's the same chemicals, it's the same atoms, it's the same electrical currents and magnetism and everything else. And I like very much the Hindu monistic perspective of droplets of water escaping the wave as it crashes upon the beaches, that it is the temporary removal of ourselves from the universal of the wave and of the ocean, which is a great vastness that we cannot understand in our experience as a droplet, but that we will one day and always necessarily return to the great oneness of all things.
You remind me the way Brian Swim tells the short version of the story of the universe. You take hydrogen atoms, you leave them alone for several billion years, and they become roses and giraffes and birdsong. And when you think that essentially the earth itself dreamed divinity, spirit, the earth, as the earth dreamed all of this up, this was like all of us, everything was at one point lava. It was all lava, and this lava became everything we know. Same, back it up, stardust. Everything is made out of stardust. It's just a way to just see how we really are, like you say, the one thing in different. It's another way of looking at it. Divinity just wanted to experience itself in all these different ways, and we are just interacting with each other through ecosystems and through interpersonal communication and all these zillions of ways that we're connected.
So the one Carl Sagan quote that I think used in A Sip of Sustenance before was that the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Another one I think is I can't remember his name, the African American astrophysicist who was
Neil
very Neil
deGrasse Tyson.
deGrasse Tyson said something like that, but he said like if reminding us that we're made of stars, he said freaking act like it. Like we are made of such miraculous immensity that we can't even conceptualize it. We need to act more like we are of such nobility than the baseness of our kind of greed and desire and immediacy. Yeah, Tim, go ahead.
I have a comment. We're worried about what are we like, but I think one of the things that always puzzles me in my old age now is what's God like? And one of the things that really affects me or really touches me is the fact that we are living in a three-dimensional universe with one temporal dimension and three spatial dimensions. As things get complex, as things get more dimensions, let's say that, the potential for complexity increases. And it's the complexity of our three-dimensional universe, spatial dimensions, that makes it possible for us to evolve and think. That complexity becomes multi-compounded when you add more and more spatial and temporal dimensions. And it's quite conceivable to me that God is him or her itself, the result of multiple dimensions, perhaps infinite dimensions, that basically turn the universe into a living existence. That really we look at the rocks on the ground and the air we breathe or whatever, and we think of that as being simple objects that are not alive. But in an infinitely dimensional universe, which we have no way of saying it exists or doesn't exist, but still, if it did exist, it would probably be infinitely alive. And we would just be a slice through it, but still there.
That almost sounded like Schrodinger's rock.
Brian shares this story, not story, but this image. He says he has this picture in his office or somewhere of Mars, and he likes to contemplate what music is latent in those rocks on Mars, because it's kind of like the lava on Earth that turned into opera singers. And, who knows what those rocks on Mars could evolve into someday. We don't know.
Just think about the fact that if there is a fourth dimensional universe, we are one slice through that fourth dimensional universe, a three-dimensional slice. Just like if we are three-dimensional, if there was a slice through it, it would be a two-dimensional universe, and that could be very easily existing. So there's all sorts of mystery. There's unlimited mystery, and perhaps that's what God is.
If you might really like the book that's on our list called Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, The Human and the New Story or something. It's a Brian Swimme book. Yeah.
Okay. Brian, what's his last name?
Swimme, it's spelled Swimme, like swim me, but swim.
Swimme.
Yeah.
Swimmy.
Before we wrap up, are there any additional questions that anybody has? We would obviously love anybody that could attend to come to Pittsburgh and be part of that Cosmic Walk. We will also be doing it at our own PIPL board retreat in September. And then, as Wanda and Karen have said, it is capable of being replicated. And, I'm sure that PIPL could facilitate bringing it to your congregation or your area. And as with all of the things that PIPL does, we want to involve congregations and individuals and communities. So if there's ever anything that you are looking to do, looking to learn about, looking to explore, or you hear us doing and you want to be a part of it, please always feel free to reach out to myself or a board member or a staff member, anybody, because we want to not place ourselves at the center of our own little cosmology, but rather to include all of those that are around us in the work. With that, are there any additional questions or anything people would like to
Can I
speak
ask a
to?
question?
Yes, please, Patricia, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I'd like to be able to send everybody a poem that I'd originally sent to Tom Wolfe about how fracking is hurting children so badly. I just recently read it to my congregation, to Quaker Yearly Meeting. It's gone out to umpteen environmental organizations around Philadelphia, and I just read it to the Philadelphia Gas Commission. But I wasn't quite sure. Do I email that to you? How do I do this?
You can email it directly to me. It's just director@pipl.org.
Okay.
And then I can
send
at
it
very
out.
least get it out to the people that registered for this. But maybe I will use it as one of my future sips of sustenance, and then it'll get out to all of the people that get that email and so forth.
Oh,
If,
that
by
would be
the way,
wonderful. Thank you.
If you have seen that you haven't been getting emails that you normally get from me, please let me know, because we've been having some technical issues with our CRM that emails out everything for us. So if you haven't been seeing emails, or if you ever don't get the email with a link or a follow-up, just shoot us an email and we'll make sure that you do get it.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Patricia, for that.
Patricia, I would really like to use that for our Earth Care Witness at our Friends meeting in Pittsburgh. Be great.
We also, speaking of wonderful speakers, we are always happy to come to congregations to speak to them, to be part of their, adult education, youth education, things like that. Not only we encourage our members and our board members and our staff to do this, but there's always n-th number of ways in which we can participate in your community and your congregation. There's also wonderful ways in which we would invite you to then also come to other congregations, frontline communities and inner city communities and elsewhere, to not only do things like creation care, but to speak, to be part of panels, to do all of the work that PAIPL is already involved with. But the more of you that are directly involved in it, the more strength and the more capacity that we have. So unless I see any other questions, I guess I will wrap things up and I will end the recording. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And I want to thank both Wanda and Karen for giving us their perspective and their expertise on the Cosmic Walk and Thomas Berry, and obviously also for even thinking about the idea of the Thomas Berry film, which was generated by Wanda and our staff member, Kathy.
Thank
Thank you all so much for being here.